Welcome to What Do You Say? The podcast that peels back the layers of remarkable individuals to reveal their extraordinary sides and their incredible lives. I'm your host, Frank Termini, and I'm absolutely thrilled to embark on this journey with you. The podcast name's What Do You Say? But that's not how it's said.
How do you say it?
We say.
What do you say?
We say.
What do you say?
We say.
What do you say?
You got it. We say.
Hey.
So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to What Do You Say? I'm your host, Frank Termini. With me, as always, my co-host and brother, Andrew Termini. If you like what we're doing, please hit like, subscribe, comment, and turn on notifications so that you could be updated on any new content. Today we have Mitchell Thompson. And Mitch is, let's see, and I can't believe you didn't put author in here because the main thing that I wanted to talk about was your book.
That's right.
Well, we're going to get to that here in a second. We're going to get to that.
I told Drew, actually, I had 2 copies I was going to bring you guys, but I left them at the office.
Man,
I'll bring you those whenever.
I really wanted to discuss the book, and you've actually written 2 books.
I've technically written 4 now. I actually, funny enough, I just finished a children's book, and I have a copy in my car that I should have brought in just to show you guys, but I've technically written 4 books now.
So, author, health professional, health consultant, personal trainer, ordained minister, and of course, like we said, author, Mitchell Thompson. Thanks for being here, buddy.
Thank you for having me. What do you say? What do you know?
What do you say? What do you say, Mitchell? So here, this conversation is definitely going to be changed now, right? Because one of the main things I do want to touch on, one of your books where you paralleled Christianity with the Muslim faith.
Pretty much all major worldly religions, I tried to correlate a baseline sort of, pretty much just tried to give people a historical context to where a lot of major worldly religions all sort of intersect.
Right.
Right. But I wrote that back in 2016 is when I started it, finished it in 2018. And yeah, that was like a lifetime ago, but.
Man, I really wanted to bet. Since then, you ran into some serious health concerns, right? It's Crohn's disease.
Crohn's disease.
Right, and it was incredibly sudden. Mm-hmm. You live a clean lifestyle, you're working out, and you do whatever what's necessary, but then every workout fanatic, every diet fanatic, just you self-loathe when you do it. You went on vacation. Right. You went on vacation. You ate, you drank, you slept in.
Yep. What's funny is I don't even drink alcohol. So the implication of a lot of these health concerns was even more surprising because I don't drink alcohol.
So you go from 0 pain
to 100%
to, literally in a matter of seconds, you're doubled over.
So, yeah.
Okay. So, and it's, how do you rule out, is it my gallbladder? Is it my appendix? Am I dealing with, typically a kidney stone would be in back pain. People mostly complain of pain there, but how do you start? Do you go to the emergency room immediately?
Yeah. So I had no idea it was Crohn's when the initial symptoms started to reveal themselves. I thought I had gastroenteritis. I thought I just had the stomach flu.
Or diverticulitis, maybe.
Yeah, well, I've had gastroenteritis before, which is essentially just the stomach flu. Diverticulitis is a more severe form, I guess.
Yeah.
Because it actually affects the diverticuli in the colon and in the intestines. But yeah, I thought I just had the stomach flu. And I've had it before, so the vomiting, the cramping, the severe cramping, these were all things that wasn't foreign to me because I at least had experienced it before. That lasted all night, and it wasn't until 2, maybe 3 p.m. the next day that I'm experiencing all of those symptoms that I finally went to the hospital. So it was...
And then what tests do they run in the hospital?
So they should have done a few different tests, but they did they first thought it was my appendix because of the location of the inflammation.
Right quadrant, right lower.
Exactly, and because of that terminal ileum, because Crohn's is association with that terminal ileum, that was the ultimate deduction that they concluded once they realized it wasn't an appendix issue.
So for
MRI, CT scan, they did all that.
So for the listeners, the ileum is part of the small intestine.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
For the listener, the ileum is going to be the most lower quadrant of the small intestine that connects into your large intestine.
You don't even got to say for the listeners. You could like say for Drew.
Right.
Because I'm sitting over here going, fuck ileum.
Yeah, right,
What is
right.
that?
All right. So for Andrew, right, the ileum is part of the small intestine. Okay. All right. So then go on.
So they thought it was because of where the location of the inflammation was and where the pain was, because I felt it in my lower abdomen. I just knew I felt it in my lower abdomen. And they started running all these tests on me, and they started saying, we think it's your appendix. My sister had her appendix removed. She had an appendectomy. My father had an appendectomy. So for me, the family history is one of probably your appendix. The CT scan and the MRI came back that said, no, we would have been able to pick up if there was something wrong with your appendix. And they essentially had no other deduction to diagnose me with other than, until we have you do a colonoscopy, we're assuming it's Crohn's disease.
Okay. So they immediately assume that in the ER.
In the ER, literally.
Okay. So then you go do your colonoscopy.
No, they should have had me do a colonoscopy that day because I had nothing in my body. I was completely clean, but they wanted to schedule me out to do the colonoscopy after I left the hospital. And because it was the end of the year, because it was veering on December, I couldn't get a colonoscopy until late January.
Right. Because everybody wants that stuff done
Right.
before their deductible starts over.
Exactly. So I wasn't even able to get in to see a specialist until I think 3 weeks after leaving the hospital. So
And
I was essentially...
How long ago was this? Like, so just to have a timestamp, was this?
Yeah, so November 12th was when I went into the hospital.
2023.
2023.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you went from November 12th at 200 pounds.
To 153 pounds.
Can we get a picture of the before and after?
Yeah, I'm sure I could pull that up if he has it somewhere.
Well, it's in the. Do you have that? Hold on, let me send it to you, Drew.
Post-production, I could always put it in. That's
Yeah, there we go.
Post-production.
Right there.
Yeah.
We can get that in post, Frank.
Okay.
Yeah, I could throw it in post-production for you.
Yeah.
All right. So you go from you're 200 pounds, you go to 153, and then now you're back to 175. We're going to get to that in a second.
178 this morning.
178. All right. Right on.
Yeah.
Okay. So now you start noticing that every time you eat, your pain exacerbates, your symptom exacerbate. Is it only pain, or is part of the exacerbation nausea, vomiting, diarrhea? Is that constant?
It's primarily cramping. So with Crohn's, unlike a lot of other inflammatory bowel diseases, IBD, so you have different forms of inflammatory bowel diseases. You've got Crohn's, you've got ulcerative colitis, and as noted, they're inflammatory diseases of the bowel. So for me with Crohn's, you experience a severe level of cramping. They call it Crohn's cramping. And that would be the immediate identifier for me whenever I realized, oh, that food or, oh, that drink didn't respond well to your body. And essentially water and ground beef were the only two things early on that I was able to literally stomach.
And you just did this by trial and error.
Well, I did a bunch of research. I had to research all this stuff because what the doctors were telling me was you're going to need to be on medication the rest of your life. There is no remedy to this other than the medical precautions we're going to put you on, namely putting me on corticosteroids, putting me on all these immunosuppressant drugs.
Okay, so basically, let's do this. So you finally have the all the tests confirmed. You did the tell me the name of this test that they did.
I didn't do the fecal calprotectin test.
You didn't do that.
No, I should have in the hospital. They should have done all these tests on me
So
in the hospital.
why did they never test you for it?
Why do they not know the difference between soluble and insoluble fiber? There's a level there's a level of just ignorance when it comes to any expert in their field, where if it veers outside of their field even a little bit, they just don't know. So the doctors at the hospital, the GI surgeon, he recommended maybe me taking a fecal calprotectin test. But I don't know what other doctor recommended I didn't, where I ended up not taking it.
So the fecal calprotectin
It
test.
measures inflammation. So a fecal calprotectin test is essentially what most people with an inflammatory bowel disorder will take, where they'll measure how inflammatory your body is responding based off of a certain measurement within a certain
Neutrophils,
range.
neutrophil in the small intestine. They're going to measure it if it's over.
He knows.
If it's over what 400.
If it's over technically 10 on some, and if it's over 30 on others.
But with Crohn's patients, they allow you to go higher, don't they?
No, with Crohn's, if it's over 30, they're still worried. It's just people with Crohn's or different forms of IBD, it's well over usually 400 or even in the thousands.
Okay. All right. So they don't ever even run that test on you.
Nope.
So they're just saying, screw this. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, if they're not doing some type of a blood work, how are they automatically just saying, hey, you have Crohn's?
That's the thing. So unless you do an actual biopsy, unless you do endoscopy, which means they're putting a camera through your body,
Right.
and then biopsy means they're actually pulling out some tissue, only then can they actually really diagnose that you've got any of these disorders. Otherwise, there isn't really any sort of blood markers or even genetic markers that can reveal that you have these things.
So the fecal calprotectin,
Even wouldn't. It would just say how inflamed my body's responding.
so that doesn't necessarily mean Crohn's. It just means it could be
Inflamed.
inflammatory bowel.
Super inflamed.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. All right. So, oh my gosh. So we don't even know that you have Crohn's.
See, for me personally, I don't think I need to shove a camera up my butt for me to be able to figure out whether or not the symptoms I'm feeling on Crohn's are parallel to everything that a Crohn's patient has experienced, namely the cramping. The cramping for me was one of the most severe, painful experiences I've ever experienced in my life, to the point where I was in bed begging God to tell me this was just a bad dream.
Right. It was
I've never felt the level of pain and discomfort I felt when I was at the height of my Crohn's cramping. That in tandem with, when you get Crohn's, it's essentially your intestines are super inflamed. And if your intestine is like a tube, you have what are known as strictures that start occurring, which tightens up the actual intestinal hole. And when those strictures tighten up the intestinal hole, it's harder for food to process through your body. So when your body is processing food, the intestines actually automatically, without you trying, push the food through a process known as peristalsis, 3000 IQ. So for me, the peristaltic motility of my gut, meaning how naturally the food would otherwise go through my food tube, because it was so constricted, I could literally feel the strictures in my intestines. I could feel it almost at every terminal valve, whether it was the jejunum whether it was the duodenum going into the jejunum going into the ileum, which these are parts of the intestine. Your intestine split into three parts technically: the duodenum, however you want to pronounce it.
Yeah.
Some doctors say duodenum.
Do they? Yeah.
And then you have then the jejunum, and then you have the ileum. Have you guys seen Semi-Pro, right?
Oh, yeah.
The jejunum from the Semi.
You ever been punching the jejunum?
Hey, what's funny is I ask some of my clients who a lot of them are even younger than me, and they're like, Semi-Pro, who's Will Ferrell? And I'm like,
Are you kidding?
I guess I'm getting old. Right?
Man.
So, right, with the jejunum, right?
No, as soon as you said the word, I just,
Semi-Pro, right.
I'm thinking, you ever been punching the jejunum?
So I could feel at the intersection of my duodenum and my jejunum where the strictures were occurring. I could feel where because I could even pull it up. I could pull up the videos. When you have strictures, when you have these tight closings in your intestines, it releases a loud, you know what barbarrhythmia is? The noise. Barbarrhythmia is the noise that your stomach makes when you're hungry. And it's essentially the noise in your intestines when certain fluids or foods are being moved in a certain way to essentially reveal that loud noise. So when your stomach's grumbling, it's just called barbarrhythmia. And when you have these strictures, my stomach the noises were so loud that it was obvious whenever I was having those tight digestive movements, those tight peristaltic movements. not only could I hear it and feel it, it was the precursor to me knowing I would have Crohn's cramping for a good 5 minutes.
Oh,
And so for me, I don't need to have a camera shoved up my ass for me to, cuss on here.
you're fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't need to have a camera shoved up me for me to be able to qualify the symptoms I felt, namely when those symptoms are very niche and unique to that diagnosis.
So how did you get the audio of you with the two different GI docs?
Yeah, so to give some context to the audience, because it hasn't come out yet, I'm making a documentary over this whole thing. And the documentary is essentially revealing the malpractice of a lot of doctors, even though it's not legally, technically considered malpractice. And it's revealing the ability for you to not have to depend on medicine if you only know what protocols to embark on if you catch yourself afflicted by any sort of disease like what I'm experiencing. And one thing you'll realize is Missouri's a one-party consent state. So I can technically record certain audios and videos as long as I'm consenting to it. It's just the legality of using that in court can vary depending on the context in which it's used.
Right. Which I don't think you're not really trying to sue anyone.
No, I ain't trying to sue anybody. I'm trying to expose their ignorance.
Right.
I'm trying to expose how stupid
Right.
a seemingly medical doctor who is given the responsibility to treat and heal people would go about reacting the way that you guys heard them react.
Which
I was blown away.
Which you wouldn't believe unless you actually heard what you guys
I was
did.
blown away.
no matter of fact, like when we drop this podcast, it'd be good maybe to have someone listen to that.
Oh, for sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I can splice in even audio clippings of it and make it look.
You need
clean
to.
and all
You
that.
need to. Yeah, because it gives them an idea of you know, in my opinion, the male seemed, the female just seemed like she was just about as dumb as the day's long.
Right.
The male, you know, it was actually like trying to listen to you. I feel like, but the problem was he had a hammer and you weren't a nail. You know what I mean?
That's definitely a good way to put it.
You know what I mean? It's like that was the only tool that he had in his toolbox, right?
He wasn't anticipating your next response to his response. He was anticipating you eventually surrendering and saying, okay, like most people do, but that was not the case. And I was thoroughly, I hate to say it, you know, because I know it's a documentary that's supposed to, you know, have a purpose, help, and educate, but it was also entertaining. I mean, thoroughly entertained by that
yeah,
conversation.
you need to have a little bit of that in there.
Well,
Man.
but here's the thing. Like, I would have had more respect from him if he would have just said, listen, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. I just don't know.
Right.
You know, because here, that's happened to me with my patients before. You know, I don't know. Let me see if I can get you in front of someone who does.
And there's nothing more commendable in my eyes than having an expert be willing to admit the limitations of their knowledge.
Yeah, I just don't know.
And experts typically have friends or contacts with other experts who, you know, that have that great information. I think there's no shame in saying, you know what, I don't know the answer to this, but I do have resources. Let me check them.
Right.
I mean, you know, so in here, and a lot of the video, and I should say the audio, they kept saying, this is just not what we see. And basically your argument was, let me just tell the audience, his argument was this: if I have a fecal cow
protectant.
if I have a fecal cow protectant test of 1,500, okay, and I go by this strict diet, okay, and my fecal cow protectant now drops from 1,500 to 500, would you then say that diet can decrease inflammation in your intestine? And they kept saying they wouldn't fucking give it to him.
No.
They wouldn't give it to him.
They were not.
They were not going to give it to him. And I'm just like, are you serious right now?
How could you say that if the lifestyle changes, the diet changes, and the number drops, that they're not directly correlated?
The thing that frustrated me the most was when the lady doctor said you can't measure diet with blood panel results. You're telling me triglyceride differences? You're telling me my blood pressure difference? You're telling me these aren't standard measurements that I can cross-reference if I had differences from two different tests and only going on a dietary change?
Yeah, I mean, Here, the fecal calprotectin alone.
Oh, 100%, because the fecal calprotectin is specific to inflammation. But that lady doctor had the audacity. She had the gall to literally say, no, blood panels really won't fix they won't measure anything.
Which is crazy, because when you go to the doctor and you have high blood pressure and cholesterol, they normally tell you need to change your diet.
Exactly.
Well, here, but listen, a lot of this is getting driven by big pharma.
100%.
I mean, you could see what big pharma allowed to happen in the opiate industry. I mean, so
How much influence does big pharma have into the decisions that doctors are making?
everything.
Because they're medical doctors, which means they're experts in medicine, which means if you know any medical doctors, you realize they had probably a half a semester of nutritional schooling that they had to undergo. And then if even then that was so early on that they forgot about all of that by the time they're in residency.
So it's all about interpreting symptoms and treating them with a certain medication that cater to that symptom.
There was a doctor on Joe Rogan that was making an argument against the use of statins, and he got fired.
How insane is that?
Making an argument against the use of statins and gets fired. And he had research article after research article after research article. And you know what?
They just did a recent study. I mean, it's anecdotal. It's N=1. But there was a study done by a Harvard scientist and his professor where they ate a bunch of Oreos compared to using statins to see which one would lower cholesterol. And guess which one lowered cholesterol more? Eating Oreos. Lowered cholesterol than taking statins. So the idea is cholesterol actually the issue? Which is something we can get into, because in my opinion, based off all the studies that we have now proven, and this isn't even really Mitchell's opinion, this is the opinion of any actual respectable doctor that you'll come across when they've dove into the literature to understand what actually causes cardiovascular disease. And it's not high LDL per se. It's the oxidation of that LDL. It's how certain variables within your cholesterol actually gets toxified in the body that then leads to atherosclerosis.
Right.
That then leads to plaque in the arteries, that then leads to cardiovascular disease.
And I think that's why, more importantly than getting just your lipid panel, you need to get an IP little a.
100%.
So
in that one, it doesn't...
it measures the size of the particle.
Exactly. So that's what I was telling you earlier. That's how you can measure essentially the oxidation of your LDL. It's not just your high LDL level.
It's a blood test where they were going to measure the size of the cholesterol particle.
Right.
You know, so... I mean, at the end of the day, a statin, I don't think changes the size as much as it changes the concentration.
The amount of cholesterol.
Right.
But guess what? Our brains need cholesterol. Our bodies need cholesterol. And dietary
You can't produce testosterone without cholesterol.
So is that why they say that cholesterol medication will have adverse effects against your testosterone?
100% it's going to, because your body cannot synthesize testosterone. It pulls from cholesterol, which is why also you have to be careful when you take testosterone and you just introduce it into the body. Now your body is not going to be triggered to use cholesterol to make testosterone, so your cholesterol level is going to go up.
Okay.
200
So you
IQ.
have unused cholesterol because of the elevation in your testosterone.
Right. It's you bypassing what normally is going to happen and just injecting it into you.
Yeah.
So now your body says, here, I don't need to make testosterone. You're already giving it to me.
So if a person is on testosterone therapy and cholesterol medication, they're basically almost contraindication.
No.
That's not that simple, but it's the simple. I mean, I don't know how deep on this you really want to go.
Go ahead. We're fine.
Well, my main thing is, I think the base understanding is we have a bastardized view of what cholesterol even is. Like we could go back to the 70s to who was the George McGovern, was that his name? We could go to the 1970s when the dietary standards were set, when they were demonizing saturated fat, which is essentially what caused, it's really in the 1950s with a guy named Ansel Keys. But they started demonizing saturated fat and correlating saturated fat and cholesterol as just being bad. So I think more importantly than understanding the implications of taking testosterone with cholesterol and all that, it's really understanding, is cholesterol bad? Because most people think it's bad. Cholesterol is not bad. Cholesterol is a vital component of any living organism.
Right. Yeah, it's a big deal.
Right.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of components that are going to you have to take into account when you're talking about a cardiac event, right?
100%.
So it's not just cholesterol,
100%.
but I mean, I've seen patients when I was part of the neurosurgical intensive care unit for 9 weeks at St. Luke's Hospital, had cerebral vascular accident, stroke, traumatic, or transient ischemic attacks. They didn't have any cholesterol problems.
Right.
They didn't have it, so sometimes shit just happens.
Sure.
Sometimes it just happens.
And it's probably lifestyle related.
Well,
I think a lot of it's lifestyle related.
it could a lot of times it could just simply be blood pressure related.
Right, but what's the blood pressure related? What does the high blood pressure come from?
The high blood pressure could come from a lot of different things.
Right, but generally speaking, most of the time, the high blood pressure comes from the body reacting in a way where it's having to push more blood in a more constricted area, which increases that pressure overall.
Okay, yeah, I understand what you're saying.
If you can decrease that overall inflammation from lifestyle changes, you generally increase the catalyst to what's causing that blood pressure,
right?
That high increased hypertension.
So you finally just say, here, listen, they're not going to listen to me.
Right.
I'm not getting on, what they want you on, Remicade?
Remicade, Entyvio, Humira, they wanted me on all those. Here's the thing. They didn't want me on one in particular. They wanted to experiment with all of them and see how my body reacted to each one.
And that Remicade's son of a bitch.
All of those suck.
Yeah.
Any immunosuppressant. So for the audience, if you have IBD, they essentially want to suppress your immune system to where your body isn't going to get inflamed when reacting to certain things. The doctors won't tell you it's not reacting to food, but namely inflammatory foods you eat are going to cause your body to react in a way where the immune system just goes rampant. And with Crohn's and IBD, the body can't differentiate what's healthy and what's a toxin. So essentially, whenever a toxin enters the body attacks everything, not just the toxin. And in order to ensure that you don't have that reaction, they completely suppress your immune system so you don't have that cascading effect of an immunoreaction.
Right.
And what that does is it decreases your immune system. You're more likely to get sick. A lot of COVID deaths, believe it or not, had a correlation. There was a high increase of people with IBD that were more susceptible to not only being on a ventilator, but dying from COVID because of how low their immune system was.
They couldn't fight it.
Yeah. That's their remedy to solving inflammatory bowel disease, is turning off the thing in your body that's supposed to fight diseases. No, thank you.
Right. Well, here, I mean, let's think about this too. Your first defense to any cancer is probably your immune system. How many therapies nowadays in cancer are immunotherapy? Here, they did a study at Duke University where they injected the polio virus into the brain tumor in order to get your immune system to attack it. So they're using the immune system now to fight cancer, and then they want to shut yours down because you got fucking stomach cramps.
How crazy is that? How crazy is that? So essentially, because I was being told all this nonsense and I felt insane because I was learning things on my own accord I was actually reading the scientific papers. Again, I'm a personal trainer, health consultant, health professional. So I had at least a background that gave me a bigger leg up than most people who would have been diagnosed with this. And yeah, you end up realizing that a lot of it is the decreasing of the inflammation. But I tell all my clients, and I did a talk at Mizzou last year. I did a presentation for an insurance company, for Americo, a big insurance company in Missouri. And the main area of focus when I talk about the key to longevity or being healthy, it's increasing circulation while decreasing inflammation. If you can increase your circulation and decrease your inflammation, that is the actual key to longevity. The problem is almost all the food we eat nowadays is so pro-inflammatory, most people can't diminish the inflammation enough to then increase their circulation appropriately. Plus how much we sit, poor posture, all these things contribute then to the poor circulation problem. I qualify circulation as a fitness issue and inflammation as a dietary issue. So when I'm working with all my clients, it's putting those two together, figuring out their fitness, figuring out their nutrition, figuring out their circulation, figuring out their inflammation, and then being able to put them in line to becoming their healthiest self.
And so tell me how you're how you're measuring circulation.
I think blood pressure is a good baseline indicator, but I think outside of any sort of clinical measurement, what I tell my clients, I wish I could almost stand up and show you guys, but when you have poor posture, your body's in I'm sure if I said anterior pelvic tilt, you know what I mean?
I do.
If I said kypholordotic state.
Yeah.
So an anterior pelvic tilt is essentially
Sticking your butt out.
It's when you stick your butt out and your gut is essentially protruded forward. And that tilt is essentially, it's disproportionate to how our anatomy is supposed to be. And we're supposed to have this, it's called a lordotic curve. We're supposed to have this curve in our lower back, but that anterior pelvic tilt causes a severe lordotic curve in our back. And so that
So the lordosis is basically your low back arched.
Right.
Okay.
And you can also have an upper cervical lordosis, which is where your neck is protruded forward more.
Chin's this way.
Yeah, chin forward, right. And then we can talk about mouth breathing and how that recedes the jawline, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, people sit a lot, which means there's an overactivation of the rectus femoris, which is the primary muscle on top of your femur, on top of your thigh. And when that rectus femoris is overactivated, it's pulling down on your hips, on your pelvis, which causes this tilt in your posture. That tilt in your posture then causes an excess pressure, an undue pressure on your lower back, which is why a lot of people have lower back issues. And so when I'm helping people fix their posture, that's the first indicator, relieving of lower back pain, that indicates they are increasing their circulation. Because they went from a butt sticking out to a butt being tucked, which allows more circulation to go through their body, which relieves a lot of that back pain.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. You know, there's a huge correlation between tightness in the quadricep, hip flexor, and hamstring. You know,
well, being in physical therapy, you must understand how you guys were taught to pretty much isolate everything. Lay them on a table, move the leg, and see how hopefully that's been changing. I hope that's been changing.
Immediately.
Thank you.
So here, you need to research Gary Gray and Dave Tabiro. Okay. Gary Gray is 100%. He would take every table out of every PT clinic.
Thank goodness.
Because, and I'll never forget this. So Frank Ferrantelli is a mentor of mine. So he was a physical therapist and kind of like, that's who I want to be like, you know. So I go to PT school and I graduate PT school. I haven't even taken my boards yet.
Okay.
And he hires me. He owned a private practice. And the first thing we did was we went to a continuing education course of Gary Gray and Dave Tabiro.
That's amazing.
And I'll never forget, I walk into the building and Frank Ferrantelli grabs me and pulls me outside. And he looked at, he's got these huge hands and he's got this finger in his massive hands.
Massive.
And he's got this finger in my face and he goes, before you walk in here, you forget everything you learned in school.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and so Gary Gray is 100% like, hey, if you ain't functioning laying down on a table, why the hell am I going to put you on a table?
Anything that you're measuring is based off of the body as an entire kinetic chain.
The only reason why most good physical therapists are going to lay you on a table and do these measurements is because the insurance companies require it.
Wow.
The insurance companies require it. We have to show some type of objective improvement in order to justify our presence. And
So now what I'm hearing is there are two things that are influence medicine, not just big pharma.
the insurance companies.
Insurance is
Sure.
Insurance
Oh, yeah.
is the devil behind the details.
yeah.
Because that's why the lady who was trying to prescribe me Entyvio, or that doctor guy that was trying to prescribe me Humira and all these other drugs, in their mind is like, bro, I'm not going to get paid if you're not on these drugs, because your insurance is going to pay for these drugs and I'm going to be administering it. So that's how I get paid.
Well, and here's the other thing. So at the end of the day, so here, I'm going to be a little bit of a devil's advocate here.
I love to hear it.
Okay.
I love being wrong, by the way.
I'm not, no. I'm not saying you're wrong because I don't think you are.
Okay.
I don't. I mean, here, look, you can relate diet to Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, you can relate cancer, you can relate it to joint pain and orthopedic pain, you can relate it to depression and anxiety, you can relate it to acne, you can relate diet to all this stuff.
Literally.
Okay? There's a reason why people who live healthy lifestyles look younger than people who don't.
Right.
Okay, so let's just call the spade, right?
Right.
But what's happening and why she kept saying, when I'm saying she, I'm talking about the female GI doctor, we just don't see this. We just don't see
and
that.
I agree with her because she sees people that aren't doing those things.
She sees people who are walking into her office and saying, here, give me the short-term fix. Give me
the medicine.
Make this shit go away.
I want the immediate results. And that's where I don't fault them other than their inability to listen to the newfound, and I don't consider it newfound because this has been around since the 1890s. Dr. J. Salisbury, who invented Salisbury steak to help his patients who had dysentery be able to absorb nutrients better, and he kept them on an all meat and water-based diet.
Wow.
We've known this since the late 1800s. I'll take one step even further. Otto Warburg is?
I don't.
They discovered this in the 20s and 30s. Otto Warburg is the guy who essentially discovered the implication of how cancer cells metastasize and won a Nobel Prize for it in the early 1900s. And guess what he discovered? If you feed these rats carbohydrates of any kind, they have a 400 times sensitivity than anything else you put in their body. And if you remove carbohydrates from these cancer-ridden rats, their cancer goes into remission because you're starving the cancer from not having any food, because the cancer can only eat that glucose because of how the cancer cell is essentially creating fuel in the actual cytoplasm.
Yeah.
He discovered this in the 20s.
Unbelievable.
What ended up happening is you had all these studies that came out, like you had Otto Warburg and you had J. Salisbury, you had all these geniuses. You had a dude named Wilhelm Stephenson is his name. Wilhelm Stephenson, he was an all plant-based diet. He loved plant-based diet. And him and his colleague, you could say they got stranded, but deep down they were exploring. They were Canadians. So they were their parents were immigrants from Europe, moved to Canada. They became clinicians in the early 1900s. I think it was actually the late 1800s. And they ended up exploring all over Canada and came across a bunch of Inuits, came across a bunch of ice people. And they ended up realizing these Eskimos had no plants in their diet, had no fiber in their diet. Wilhelm Stephenson and his colleague ended up being forced to eat the diet of those Eskimos. He anecdotally explained how he never felt better or healthier in his life eating nothing but fat and protein. He then comes back to civilized society and starts promoting this idea of, I think fat and protein is essentially how you get healthy and it's how people can live their healthiest lives. He was such a staunch advocate of that him and his colleague for 12 months, I think it was in 1917, for 12 months sat in a hospital and allowed the doctors to test that theory on themselves. And they ate nothing but fat, nothing but protein, nothing but meat. That was all that they consumed, no carbs. And their measurements all came out and said that they were healthier than when they came in, based off all the clinical measurements they had at the time.
So I was heavily influenced by Game Changer, the documentary.
So I was going to ask about that. That's a vegetarian diet or vegan or what is it?
I did the plant-based diet for like 6-7 months, maybe in the better half of 8 months, and gained 30 pounds. And it felt worse and had more inflammation than I've ever had. So what would you attribute that to?
So to answer that, why did Otto Warburg essentially say the way we get rid of cancer cells, the way we starve cancer cells is by getting rid of the glucose? Why did Wilhelm Stephenson feel better without having plants in his diet? Why did J. Salisbury not prescribe broccoli to his clients with dysentery? The reason why is because fundamentally humans have evolved most animals have evolved. I mean, we could even talk about a gorilla and a cow who eat nothing but plants. They're herbivores. Most animals have evolved to operate off of just fat and protein. And so when you're on a vegan diet, you're not only devoiding yourselves of the fat and protein, you're eating nothing but carbs. and you're getting nothing but an excess influx of all the anti-nutrients that those plants have. Because you have to realize, plants cannot run away from you. So how are plants going to protect themselves whenever they need to spread their seed to the next generation and not just get ate? They create defensive toxic chemicals like lectins, like oxalates, like phytates, like gluten. They create all these toxic chemicals to deter predators from eating them. And so when you're only eating those toxic compounds, and this is all the stuff that's in my book, actually, Healthy Made Easy, when you understand what foods are dense with what I call anti-nutrients, you end up realizing that's the actual cause specifically to the inflammation. So for you, not only are you starving probably because you have no nutrients in your body, so you're having to eat a whole bunch of greens, you're overcompensating with the quantity of greens that you're eating, which is giving you more toxic anti-nutrients than your body would have otherwise been used to, even if you only ate one salad a day.
And it's interesting, like a lot of the recipes that I was using had an excess amount of nutritional yeast. And I don't hate the taste of nutritional yeast, but I'm kind of curious as to, was that part of the cause?
For sure. Yeast fundamentally is going to be,
The word nutritional.
it's almost like it's almost like where do I start? Because think of it like this. Any vegan, any vegetarian will tell you you have to supplement. There's certain vitamins though that are essential to the body. And when I say essential nutrients, it's nutrients your body cannot produce and depends on exogenous resources to get. Vitamin D is one of the only real vitamins we can produce. We have to get almost all our other vitamins from other animals or from other sources. So people that are on vegan and vegetarian diets, they'll admit, even the experts will admit, you have to supplement to some degree. And if you have to supplement on a vegan or vegetarian diet, you're off rip admitting that it's a deficient diet because it's deficient of certain nutrients you have to supplement to become sufficient.
Right. So you decide, I'm not going with traditional medicine here. And you say, I'm going to do what I know and has been proven to decrease inflammation. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to change my diet. Mm-hmm. And so you only ate red meat and drank water.
That's it. Red meat, water, and salt.
So that's the only seasoning you'll use.
Right. And that was a form of, if anything, it was a form of me being able to get some electrolyte in on top of it being a seasoning.
So I'm going to throw out a dumb comment here because it's just something that I've heard, which, I'm getting inundated with, pretty much every diet, just like the general population. The brain runs on carbohydrates.
That is what we've been told. The brain prefers ketones. The brain, if anything, will only operate off of carbohydrates when ketones aren't available.
Okay.
And then we can get into not only the cancer stuff I alluded to earlier because of how cancerous cells have a 400 times sensitivity than any other cell, which means if you have just a little bit of glucose coming in your body, the cancer cell is eating that from every other cell and is essentially all of that fuel is going to the cancer cell. So what you end up realizing is Alzheimer's, dementia, these neurological issues, you're aware that they're classified technically as type 3 diabetes, right?
I didn't know that.
They've classified dementia in 2008, maybe it was Alzheimer's in particular in 2008, but they'll say AD, Alzheimer's dementia, as type 3 diabetes. And what is diabetes? An insulin resistance issue. So if type 3 diabetes is a neurological issue, there has to be some correlation between the insulin and the glucose. Now, for the audience, how about this, Drew? I'll help prove to you that glucose isn't necessarily for the body just by understanding insulin. If your blood sugar has less than 4 grams, if it has less than 4 grams of carbs, meaning right now, I've been fasting all day, and I've been able to consult 5 different clients. I've been able to work out this morning. I've been able to do all this stuff fasted. You could say my blood sugar is about carries about 4 grams within it throughout the entirety of my system. The second I put 1 gram too many, if I put just 1 gram of carb in my body, my pancreas will start releasing insulin to get it out of my blood system. So the pancreas releases insulin because it identifies glucose as a toxin in the blood and tries to get it out the blood and push it into the cell. And so what ends up happening is people who eat glucose in excess, which we've been doing for over 100 years, you end up having more sugar in the blood than insulin can be produced to then get it into the actual cell. Because glucose needs insulin to be used as energy, whereas fat and proteins don't need insulin as a carrier, as a signaling molecule to get it into the cell.
I see. That's why you'll see some bodybuilders take insulin along with sugar in order to force it into the cell.
And that's where without having the specific examples, which I'm glad you're having the brainstorming correlation with all this, what matters is the fundamental understanding of what even is insulin. What is a carbohydrate? What is glucose? Because glucose is just carbohydrates broken down to their most smallest form. When we eat a carb, we consume it as a carb that breaks down into glucose that then gets used as energy. But the glucose can't go into the cell and get used as energy without insulin. Whereas if you consume fat and protein, the fat and protein, it's really the fat because the protein can then go through a process called gluconeogenesis, which is how our body can naturally produce glucose, which is how we'll always have essentially 4 grams of sugar in our blood at any time, because if we're low on glucose, our bodies have evolved because our bodies are smart enough to create glucose if we're glucose deficient from the protein and the fats. And that all happens in the liver.
Man.
So
it's crazy.
what's it called?
crazy.
Yeah,
Gluconeogenesis?
so gluconeogenesis, new, genesis.
Formation of
in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
So gluconeogenesis is the new formation of glucose.
Okay.
Our liver's able to do that when we don't have enough glucose and we need to like restore our glycogen and all this other stuff, which without boring the audience with what all that means, it essentially says, we don't have any carbs. All right, hey, get us some of that fat and some of that protein and turn it into glucose for us.
Okay. I'm tracking. Gosh damn. This conversation is.
Yeah, it's,
I'm not smart enough for this guy.
I don't know that I am either.
if I'm talking out of pocket, please.
No. So you then decide that you're going to change your diet. You do this. How long does it take for your symptoms to start to decrease?
1 week.
1 week.
I went from November 15th, let's say November 16th is when I got discharged. I followed their dietary protocols, ate a bunch of greens, ate what was known as the brat diet.
You had to be miserable.
Miserable.
I mean, what makes you more gassy and bloated than broccoli?
What cruciferous vegetables and fiber they wanted me on.
Fiber makes you gassy too.
Fiber is what causes the gut motility we were talking about earlier. It blocks your intestines essentially because it can't be digested. I was telling Drew earlier, maybe I didn't go in depth on this, but fiber cannot be broken down by any living organism other than bacteria. Not even termites can break down fiber. So what does that mean? Let's think about a gorilla or let's think about a cow who are herbivorous animals, meaning they only eat
Fiber.
Yeah. When they eat fiber, and this goes back into when they demonize saturated fat, which I can get into also, when they eat these fibrous materials, these fibrous plants, it gets pushed into their body. Their body's like, bro, we can't digest this until it reaches their large intestine, until it reaches their cecum. Your cecum is just the beginning of your large intestine. The cecum, which is what differentiates humans from other animals, namely from other primates, we'll say, is going to be how long and how effective that cecum is. And gorillas have this really long cecum compared to humans having this really small cecum. And what's funny is if you look at the appendix, what is the appendix? Frank, you're aware the appendix is a vestigial organ, right?
Well, but I don't even know why it's there.
Well, let me answer for you why it's there. What happens when you have a balloon and you take all the air out?
flattens out.
Flattens and shrivels up. So our cecum used to be this long colonic organ, no different than what a gorilla had, in that we were more used to processing fibers because that is the location in which fiber is processed. And when I say fiber is processed, yes, we can't break it down, but we have this bacteria in our gut. It's called your microbiome. The gut bacteria is what actually breaks down the fiber. And guess what that gut bacteria produces once it eats the fiber? Short chain fatty acids, which is a saturated fat. And so gorillas, cows, any herbivorous animal that's eating fiber is eating the fiber and then turning it into saturated fat and proteins, because then the protozoa, meaning the bacteria, once it eats it, it essentially farts out the saturated fat, if you will. Right. And then the protozoa will die off into the intestine and will turn into proteins, will turn into amino acids. And so gorillas, cows, herbivorous, fibrous eating animals still operate off protein and fat.
Right.
So for humans, we have that vestigial cecum, that vestigial appendix, because it's evidence that we stopped eating so much fiber and started focusing on things that didn't require fermentation in the gut, which alludes to us not ever having really needed fiber through the bioevolutionary process of our bodies getting to the point where it currently is.
Right. It's a primitive organ.
It's a primitive organ. And the cecum, again, that if you look at your intestine almost looks like a question mark. The first part of that, your large intestine, your colon, looks like a question mark. That first part of your large intestine, of your colon, which mine was super inflamed, that is where fiber is processed, and they wanted me on a high fiber diet.
So did your high fiber diet cause you more pain?
More pain.
Oh.
My strictures were 50 million times worse whenever I ate the fibers they wanted me to eat.
So
like
you
apples.
left the hospital, followed what the doctor said, and were experiencing increased pain. That's got to be so frustrating.
That's why I felt insane, wondering if I can't trust these people, who do I listen to?
No, it's a tough situation to be in. It's a tough situation to be in. So then you go to GI Doc 1.
Yeah.
And GI Doc 1 gives you her spiel. Mm-hmm. And then you go get a second opinion. Mm-hmm. And he gives you his spiel. Mm-hmm. And then at that point you say,
F this, I am committing to what I think to be true because it's my body. And ultimately, I need to decide what's best for me because I know that I actually care about me. I don't think they care about me.
And so you go 1 week.
1 week, straight meat, straight water, straight salt. Slowly, my symptoms started resolving themselves. Once I started seeing an alleviation of the symptoms, I then slowly introduced new foods.
So what you're really trying to do is not be in a situation, I want people to understand this. You don't want to be in a situation where you're perpetually only eating red meat and water.
Oh, no. Good Lord, no. And what's funny is, like Drew was talking about, he was on a ketogenic diet. I have clients that they'll tell me, oh, I don't think I can cut out carbs. Oh, keto's too hard. I was telling Drew also, my girlfriend Enza, second generation Sicilian, meaning her grandparents are from Sicily, meaning on Sunday dinners, they're creating all traditional meals and stuff.
Right.
I'm sitting here having to tell her, and she has celiac disease.
Right.
Which means she can't eat gluten. So imagine the world change that was for her and her family when that happened.
Right.
They had to start making her specific gluten-free pasta, right? And so I told her, because she was getting worried when I brought up, hey, maybe we could eliminate even more carbs from your diet to make you feel even better, because I'm noticing you're still having gastrointestinal issues, even though you've resolved all of your celiac symptoms. Any residual symptoms you may have may be similar to what I'm experiencing, given the potential carbs you're eating that I'm not eating.
So
go ahead.
So my question is, it takes you a week to have a reduction in symptoms.
Right.
How long till it took you to have the symptoms eliminated?
So I'll answer that, but to finish the point real quick is people get overwhelmed in thinking being restrictive is this over complicated and arduous, difficult thing to do, when deep down, when you're only eating red meat, salt, and water, then you know what being strict really is. Because then you're only eating ground beef and you don't even want to eat food because you get sick and tired of having to eat the same thing.
Oh, for sure.
So being on a ketogenic diet, and this is what I told my girlfriend, and I was even kind of alluding to this to Drew earlier, is if I could be on a keto diet my options would be so much more that I look at it as almost being spoiled with all the options I would have if I could eat those things, which currently I can't because of the Crohn's. So the idea is if I can heal my gut enough, I will be able to have less of an inflammatory reaction to specific foods, which means I can introduce foods that I currently cannot eat that I'll be able to eat down the road. And I won't know that until I experiment with that sometime in the future. And recently I've experimented with things like like eggs was something I experimented with, even though that's not a carb dense food. But I've experimented with like almond flour, like stuff like that, different seeds and nuts and different forms of those seeds and nuts.
No problems?
Certain ones, like almond flour in particular, no problem. Coconut products, no problem. And a lot of that has to do with, again, understanding, well, why almond and not peanuts? It's like, well, peanuts aren't a seed. They're technically a bean because they're grown underground, but they're called peanuts. So people think they're nuts, but they're not.
Right.
And I have an adverse reaction to legumes, which are just beans, right? And they're super inflammatory. In fact, certain beans, without going off topic, can literally kill you if you don't cook them the right way. If you eat raw pinto beans, raw kidney beans, they will kill you. You have to cook them the right way. That shows the toxic anti-nutrients I was alluding to earlier. If you're wondering why plants and certain foods may have these toxic responses to the human body or to any animal body, because that's how they defend themselves. But to answer your question with regards to after a week, I started seeing symptom relief. When did I start seeing, we'll just say, remission-like symptoms? I feel like, well, the studies show that within 3 weeks you get remission of symptoms. I got remission of symptoms about after a week. 3 weeks in, I was able to introduce new foods without it affecting my body the same way. And the studies show, and I could literally pull up studies for you that show, and this is what was so funny with the doctors, and you guys saw it in the documentary, is on biopsy of a colonoscopy, there have been Crohn's patients who have only removed the carbohydrates and the toxic inflammatory foods from their diet, and they were in full remission on biopsy, not in just their symptoms.
So that they still ate everything else except your complex carbohydrates.
It's namely starches and sugar. And what this again has been known since like the 20s. I got to remember the doctor's name, Leo something. He proved that starches and sugar is essentially what fuels the bad bacteria in the gut to then cause an overactivation of the immune system.
And sugar is the most addictive thing. I mean, it's like heroin.
Sugar is heroin, literally.
The thought of eating red meat and water makes me miserable thinking about it.
Right. Now when I tell people, if you don't have an inflammatory bowel disease, you don't have to go on, that's considered a carnivore diet. You don't have to go on a strict carnivore diet. In my opinion, you don't even have to cut out carbs entirely. I don't think people need to go on a ketogenic diet. I think people need to avoid the specific carbs in our society that lead to these cascading, debilitating diseases that we are just now having to experience that our ancestors didn't experience 150 years ago.
Because they didn't even have it.
Because they didn't have that shit. And I could get into the specific catalysts, which in my opinion has to do with, and again, it's not really my opinion, a lot of the studies are showing this, it has to do with seed oils. It has to do with omega-6 fatty acid and the disproportionate distribution and ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s, which we can get into. That's what essentially what my book was about, or Healthy Made Easy. That's what it's about. It's about all that. It's about giving people the bare minimum of how to get healthy without completely having to go on a keto or carnivore diet.
There was a certain, I don't remember the ratio, but they wanted a certain ratio of omega-3 to omega-6.
Should be 1-to-1.
Is that what it was?
Guess what it is for the average American? Conservatively, 1-to-25. Omega-1 to omega-3 to omega-6.
1 omega-3 to 25.
And that's a conservative estimate. That's what they'll show in the studies. And here's the thing you got to realize. We can go back to the LDL and the oxidized cholesterol. You have omega-3s, which people know you got to take omega-3 fatty acids, omega-3 complex fish oils, right?
I just take them because they say you're supposed to take them.
Right.
Been taking for like 20 years.
Right.
You know?
So fish oils, omega-3s, good fatty acid, good polyunsaturated fatty acid. Omega-6s, they're necessary, but they're bad because of how much we consume, essentially. They're necessary, but they're necessary in proportion to how many omega-3s you have. And omega-3s, so EPA and DHA are the main omega-3s that dietitians worry about you getting because we're so deficient in, and because of how they are effective for your brain. So the majority of the fat in our brain, with our brain being a heavily fat organ, is DHA that comes from an omega-3. And that's the idea that we ate a lot of fish when we evolved, which caused us to have our brain grow and all this other stuff. But the ultimate idea is omega-3 is good, omega-6 is bad.
Okay.
And when you know the history, you end up realizing canola oil, which started with Crisco, which I could get into if you guys want, canola oil, sunflower oil, anything that's not, which you guys don't have to necessarily worry about, anything that's not cold pressed extra virgin olive oil or avocado oil or coconut oil. Those are the only 3 good oils you could say for cooking. Anything that's not those, which is going to be the seed oils.
So when I fry my meatballs, I shouldn't fry them in canola oil.
No, you should not. But that's another conversation. Olive oil, literally. Extra virgin or cold pressed extra virgin.
Because I always do it in canola oil. They taste great. I'll tell you, I got some of the
100%.
best meatballs you've ever tasted. But I did not know that canola oil was...
So, but here, so that being said, well, meatballs have breadcrumbs in them.
Yeah, they do.
Right. But you could use what I use, which is you can take pork rinds, mash them up, which is fried pork, essentially fried pork skin, and you can use that as your breading. And I make chicken tenders with pork rinds as my pork panko, which allows me to get chicken tenders without having to bread them, even though they're breaded.
Yeah.
Right.
So these are, and again, I had to be creative in my dietary choices because of my life circumstances. Most people do not have to be even a fraction of as strict as I am. They just have to know what foods to avoid. In my book, Healthy Made Easy, that's essentially what you have. At the back of the book, you have foods to avoid. I give you a shopping list of foods you should buy, all green, all good, meaning green as in it's approved. There's still greens and vegetables on there. But the main thing to consider whenever you're going to the store is, what do I need to avoid and what is toxic?
So
And a lot of it is seed oils.
So
But
3 weeks, meat, salt, and water.
3 weeks.
Then you introduce, what'd you introduce first?
Steak was the next thing I introduced. Well, outside of meat,
After ground beef.
outside of red meat, it was chicken. So it was a white meat. And I recommend people eat more red meat than white meat because they've done studies that show if you don't have enough fat in your diet, you can't just operate off protein. So you need to have some of that fat in your diet.
When we were talking earlier, you mentioned the stomach, the number of stomachs that a chicken has versus a cow has, and how that affects how the meat affects your body. Talk about that a little bit. That kind of blew my mind a little bit.
Yeah, so you have cows, which are known as ruminant animals. They're polygastric, meaning they have 4 stomach chambers. And it makes sense. If you have 4 different filtration systems, more trash can go through that, and it can come out cleaner on the other side versus if you had only 1 filtration system. And chickens, I mean, pretty much all other forms of meat, but mainly chicken and pork, are monogastric, meaning they only have 1 stomach chamber. And so if you have grain-fed cows versus grain-fed pork versus grain-fed chicken, the grain-fed cow, the meat will be less tainted because all that toxic BS from the grain was able to get more synthesized and more filtered through the 4 chambers versus the chicken essentially being a grain with feathers, because the grain goes straight through the monogastric stomach and then it ends up absorbing into the meat, and now you're eating tainted meat. And it's the same thing with pork. So when I recommend my clients eating certain meats, I recommend, if they're worried about the quality of meat, they really need to worry about the quality of their chicken and their pork, because they could get grain-fed cows. It doesn't have to be grass-fed cows. It doesn't have to be 100% organic, as long as it's a ruminant meat that is able to filter all that BS out.
One of it's gamey. Like when I went
Sure. Some people prefer more gamey meat than not.
I don't. Like,
Right.
yeah. Which one's gamey? Grass or
Gamey-
grain?
Gamey is essentially going to be more natural, so it's going to be more grass-fed.
Grass. So, okay. Yeah. Because I went and
So you
got
probably don't like the taste of deer at all.
it. Absolutely not. It's too rich.
Right, see? Yeah.
I love some deer.
Right.
Man.
So, and again, this all comes from a fundamental understanding of not demonizing saturated fat, which is in red meat, which is why this new documentary that just came out called, I don't know what it's called, but it's by the same people who made Game Changers, which, by the way, Game Changers and this new documentary, it's called We Are What We Eat. Both are sponsored by Impossible Meat.
Well,
So
and I was buying Impossible meat. I ate the hell out of that stuff, and I ate Impossible.
30 pounds.
I ate Impossible everything.
that's why you gained 30 pounds.
I was like, gosh damn it,
That's why you were super inflamed.
this is ridiculous. This has got to be. I mean, I don't. It makes no sense.
It makes no sense.
So you go red meat, ground beef, steak,
Chicken next.
then chicken.
And then I introduced almond butter was the next one.
So so almond butter. So would you like use it as a seasoning or
I
something?
literally got spoons of almond butter. We put those little. My girlfriend used to work at a restaurant, so those little things they put the ketchup in.
Yeah.
I would just put almond butter in that, and I would take little knives full, and I would just see how my body responded to it. So I would just eat almond butter by itself because I wanted to see, and I would do it fasted so I could have a clean slate to see how my body reacted to just it. And
That's
nothing else.
smart. That's a good idea, right? This
And I've
way-
done that with everything essentially that I've experimented with.
the new stuff. Okay, so
Which is brilliant for from fasting purposes, because that's really a great way to understand exactly what you're eating and how it's affecting you.
Exactly, 100%.
so 3 weeks out, you have no symptoms,
No symptoms.
and then you go. When you initially introduced the food, did you become symptomatic ever and then it go away, or did you not? If you started with chicken
Right.
and your chicken then made your stomach hurt, then you said, "I'm done with chicken."
Right. So it was no matter what I ate, I had a reaction in my gut because of the destroyed state of my stomach, or my intestines. My
So you
intestines
always would ache a little bit.
always would ache a little bit. And it wasn't until I got into what I considered the early stages of remission. Let's call it the 3-week mark. So at the 3-week mark, when I'm in the early stages of remission, though I felt symptom relief after week 1, I would still have sensations that were Crohn's-like up until I felt like I was in remission, which is about 3 weeks in. Yeah, no, for the most part, the only allergic reaction I would have that was noticeable for me to then not adopt that new food into my diet was when the cramping came, because the cramping then initiated to me that the immune system is active enough that it's starting to, it's 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. It was a clear identifying marker for me that food was a no-go. Peanut
Right.
butter was the first one, which is why I switched to the almond butter.
So you tried peanut butter before almond butter.
Destroyed me.
Destroyed you. Okay.
The only negative responses I had were ones that I'm assuming I have an allergic reaction to, like eggs. Like I still can't eat eggs. I ate eggs 2 weeks ago and I was down for 2 days.
Leave that alone.
Trust me, you don't got
Yeah.
to tell me twice.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, what about like egg whites?
I think the problem is we initially thought it was the egg whites because of how the egg white protein responds differently in the body when being synthesized. So I first,
Well, because really the yolk's fat.
right. So I said, F the egg whites, let me get that yolk. Enza made me 3 yolks, and I had a worse reaction to the yolk than the egg whites.
Oh, so then you just leave it alone.
And I was so mad because I love eggs. And that's a hell of a good source of fat. So, yeah.
Okay, so what's your diet like currently?
So currently I'm on a strict carnivore diet. I'm on a strict ketovore diet. But primarily I'll wake up, I'll eat a steak, usually a ribeye. I'll go from eating a 12-ounce ribeye to then a quarter of a pound of ground beef with cheese on it. And I'll have
So you
that
could
as like my
take the
first
ground beef and then put salt on it, put it on a grill, and put some cheese on it,
meal, and I'm good to go.
and you're all right. You can do that. It's not going to bother you.
Especially when I was so used to only eating ground beef, when I knew I could add cheese to it,
Oh man, that's
it was a game changer.
cheese
So-
is.
What about like have you tried any seasoned salt or anything, or is it just straight salt?
So I use a specific type of salt that
Pink salt?
Yeah, so essentially I'll use Himalayan pink salt.
Camelone sea salt.
Yep, or
They
I'll use
also say
Celtic
that's
salt.
that actually causes it decreases water retention. There's research that would suggest that it decreases water retention versus
Exactly.
increasing,
And
it,
all of this stuff is
which is
proportion-
weird. I don't know how, but
You're preaching because I'm not a bioenergeticist. I'm not an expert in bioenergetics, so I have no idea either. But it's all of these things are in proportionality to the quantity that you consume.
so steak in the morning,
Steak in the morning,
and then what?
then ground beef usually immediately after.
The
'cause I'm
piece of
usually
cheese,
starving.
and then what?
So at that point, I'll give myself a break because I'm usually satisfied. And most people don't realize we shouldn't eat just to eat. We should eat when we're hungry, and we should be hungry to fuel our bodies. So I used to eat out of boredom, which I told you I didn't drink alcohol, but I used to consume a whole lot of sugar.
Right.
Like I would snack a lot on sugar.
Yeah.
And so I still have that residual bad behavior of wanting to eat a lot of sugar. So I've now been able to replace that with certain almond butter recipes where I'm able to use almond butter and create like my own protein bars.
So you'll do almond butter with like what? Oats?
So what I'll do
Oats
is
too much fiber.
way too much fiber.
Yeah, that'll make you
Oats,
miserable.
any sort of wheat. There's so much to even talk about with regards to like why I avoid those things. But at the end of the day, it's knowing what to avoid and why. And I essentially avoid all wheat, all oats, and it's because of how they're processed.
What do you do for the sweet tooth?
That's the problem. I
mean, like,
I didn't. And
are you just like thinking about not being
Trust
able
me.
to get like a snack after you're done?
trust me. So guess what?
Yeah, I mean,
Like right now it's making me like,
after I eat, I'm like, I need something sweet.
it's terrible.
So here's what I was able to do, Frank, because I was and still am. My name is Mitch Thompson, and I'm a sugar addict. Like I have always been, and I didn't know until this recent life experience that I legit, like most people, have an addiction to sugar. And it's no different than any other drug.
I knew I did when I went keto. I
Right.
stopped doing keto because I lost too much weight. I didn't like
Right.
the way I looked.
100%.
Okay, so I did realize it because I felt sick,
Right.
lethargic.
No different than withdrawal symptoms, like when a heroin addict gets off heroin.
Well, I mean, I don't think it was as severe, but I
course
felt
not, 'cause
shitty.
sugar isn't heroin.
Yeah, but I felt shitty, terrible, right?
The keto flu.
And
right.
then probably 10 to 14 days into it, I felt like an animal.
Exactly.
I felt like an animal. I mean, the only reason why I stopped ketogenic diets was because I had such a hard time putting on weight, and I didn't like the way I
I
looked.
guarantee you, if you sat with me once a week, we could talk about getting you on the right ketogenic diet where you would not only like the way you look, you'd feel better and probably look better than you currently look and feel.
It's gonna be hard to look better.
That's a good point.
No.
But the full rationale is one of understanding ultimately what are bad things doing to our body? Why should we avoid them? And because I knew I had to avoid sugar, but I know I'm a sugar addict, I was able to replace that. I was able to satisfy that sweet tooth by finding the healthiest alternative possible. So there's a new chemical that's called allulose. Have you heard of allulose?
I have not.
So allulose is like a monk fruit. Have you heard of monk fruit extract? So these are two forms of sugar that we've essentially been able to synthesize from natural fruits, from natural plants. And they have less toxic effects on the body, namely in how the gut responds from an inflammation standpoint. And so allulose is a sweetener. It's only 70% as sweet as sugar that people use as a healthy alternative without it spiking their blood sugar. Because allulose and I think monk fruit actually may, but allulose doesn't spike your blood sugar. And so what I did is I realized, okay, a lot of these keto people are using allulose. A lot of these keto people are using monk fruit also. What are these things? Looked into them, realized what they were, realized that both of them, if used at the right dosages, don't spike your blood sugar. And I realized, well, the studies show that monk fruit extract has a 200 times sweetness to table sugar. So I go, okay, if allulose has a 70% sweetness and monk fruit has a 200 times sweetness, I'll do about 80% allulose, 20% monk fruit, and I'll make my own sugary blends. So I was able to make my own protein bars, which when I leave here, and after I eat my ribeye, and after I eat my ground beef, I look forward to the protein bar that I'm going to eat.
And that protein bar probably tastes so sweet to you because you're not desensitized from all the other sugar.
Exactly.
'Cause
So
I do remember that. Like my wife would make protein balls, and she would take protein powder, and she'd take egg whites and oats and peanut butter, and just like a little bit of like a pinch of brown sugar, and then she would just blend it up and make a ball, and then stick it in the refrigerator. And
how'd that taste to you?
amazing,
Right.
I mean, they at the time they were amazing. Now, right now,
It would taste like a dull ball of mud.
right,
Right.
Yeah,
Because you're
but-
used to having that
Yeah.
extraordinary sweetness.
Because I ate a chicken parm sandwich last night and then went and got a Snickers.
100%.
Yeah.
So that's how I satisfy the sweet tooth, though, is by finding healthier alternatives.
So then, at what point were you able to start adding those? Tell me those types of.
Allulose and
allulose.
monk fruit extract.
So when were you able to start testing with those?
Right around that 4-week mark, right about, actually, it was probably 2 weeks after the 3-week remission. So I would say it was really like late December, like right around Christmas. is
So
when I
fruit.
implemented.
Have you tried fruit yet?
Man, I tried a grape the other day and it debilitated me. That's what really irritated me, pun intended, because the irritation.
Right.
It really got under my skin because I'm like, I can't even have a single grape
Yeah.
because of the fructose. It has to do with what's known as fructose malabsorption. I have a fructose malabsorption problem, which means my body can't absorb the fructose because, like insulin sensitivity, my body was so used to so much fructose that it's like, we're not going to absorb this little fructose you got in your body. So it passes it on to my colon, and my colon ferments it, and I'm having that allergic reaction to now that fermented fructose.
And there's a lot of people that just don't understand, fruit has a ton of sugar in it.
Fruit is literally, there are sugar bombs.
Like an apple has the same glycemic index as a Snickers.
200 IQ. That's the thing is, I write about that in my book. I write about glycemic index, glycemic load. I talk about those things. I talk about how it's okay if you have something that is high glycemic, meaning it's going to cause your blood sugar to spike, like white rice. You just have to know when to put that into your body. You don't want to break fast with that.
Like a lot of times when I'm going to have a high sugar intake, I'll do it right before or right after I work out.
Literally.
And then my body will shred through it.
Exactly. And that's a different, responsible, mindful way of utilizing it as a fuel versus mindlessly eating it for the sake of feeling good because it hits that dopamine receptor no different than taking a heroin shot.
Yeah.
So I've got to ask, we've got to address the biggest craze out there, and it's pharma and diet, the semaglutides. What do you know about that? What can you? Is there anything you could share with our audience?
Is there anything in particular that you're referencing?
Well, just like the semaglutides, that shot that people are
like
taking.
Ozempic and all that, Mounjaro. Yeah. So we don't have enough studies to know the long-term implications of that. And I have people in my family and people I love that lazily decided to go down that route because they thought that going down the dietary and lifestyle change was too severe for them. So they went down that route. It's essentially all it does, it's an appetite suppressant. It suppresses your appetite. And when you're having an appetite suppressant suppress your appetite, you're not eating as much food. And so what little food you are eating, you feel decent eating, it's probably malnourished food that doesn't have as much nutrients in it. So ultimately what those things usually do is lead to malnutrition.
So
right.
Doesn't it slow down how your digestion?
I'm not really
Well,
sure.
here, this is what I will tell you, and I know that there's research to back this. There is 100% a decrease in muscle mass.
Yeah,
when
I did
people
see
take
that. I did see that.
There's
That's a lot of the weight loss was the muscle mass loss.
It's a muscle mass loss that they're losing.
Not
so
weight loss
so
necessarily.
you'll see people who are taking that shot. They're also flaccid.
Right.
Right. So you're not really gonna, like you personally who like to exercise. I mean, you may take it to jumpstart it, but it's not something you're going to want to be on longevity.
It's not something. Yeah, it's not something I would even recommend people even experimenting with, only because it's a drug that's meant for something completely different.
It's meant for diabetes.
Meant for diabetes.
Yeah. So, but like maybe, I mean, you'd have to be super disciplined, but you'd have to probably force yourself to eat the amount of protein that you're going to want to consume in order to maintain some lean muscle.
Exactly. If you were taking those medications.
If you were taking those medications.
Okay.
Because you just literally won't have the appetite.
Because I understand that it was meant to help type 2 diabetics, but it is completely getting marketed in a way
Weight
now.
loss.
You want to know what helps type 2 diabetics more than anything?
Diet and exercise.
Decreasing sugar in their diet. And they've proven that they've put in type 2 diabetics on a sugar-free and a starch-free diet, and they've completely reversed their type 2 diabetes.
Yeah.
These are proven studies, randomized controlled trials.
And I argue, you remember the time we were sitting with my father-in-law who was a brittle diabetic?
Yeah.
You know, I like literally would go get his toes done, and he would get done and he was catatonic. And it happened to him, I don't know how many times, because his blood sugar would drop.
What do you mean by get his toes done?
He would go get his toenails clipped. Diabetics got to be careful with they can't get wounds on their feet.
Literally.
So he would go and get like the pedicure and have someone cut his toes for him so he wouldn't like, you know, if you cut your toenail too close or something. Uncle Chuck
One
does
small
it.
infection will cause a cascade of effects.
Yeah, Uncle Chuck has somebody come to cut his toenails.
Which is questionable because I have literally Band-Aids on my toes right now because my feet hurt so bad.
Yeah, I mean,
And it's ridiculous. I think it's uric acid, but
Well,
We'll
I
have
mean,
to sit down
take
and
some.
talk because I think there's a few little things you'd have to change to realize how optimal you could actually be.
Yeah.
Well, and here, there's a couple things that I think society doesn't understand. Number one, how bad sugar is for you
Right.
and how many comorbidities it causes.
Literally.
And number two, I don't think sedentary America knows how bad they feel.
Right. And once they finally feel a little better off of any of those medications, they think that is good because it's better than how shitty they felt before.
Right. Where, like, if you could get them moving, and
Circulation.
if you could get them moving, get that serotonin rush, you know, those types of things going, they'll feel so much better, so much less depressed, so much less anxious, so much less irritable. Their sleep-wake patterns are going to get better. Their sex drive's going to improve. You know, like when I get injured, like, you know, the first thing that happens to me, my sleep-wake pattern goes to crap. You know, I'm irritable, I'm depressed, my sleep-wake patterns. If I can't go exercise, I'm a miserable human being.
I agree.
I am. I'm miserable. And my wife will say, "Can't you just give your body a rest?" Most of the time I don't give my body a rest because my body feels like shit when I don't move.
Right.
My
And
back
rest
is stiff.
looks different for everybody too.
Well, yeah, I haven't. Yeah, you're right. Rest
Yeah.
looks different for everyone.
Right.
You know, but my back starts to ache. My neck will ache. Even like when I go on vacation, I have to go move.
100%.
I have to go do it. I think sedentary America just doesn't realize how bad they feel.
And the thing that I would really want to harp on is even if you couldn't work out because you have physical limitations like my dad who had a knee replacement and has osteo and rheumatoid arthritis severely, I look at the distribution of getting healthy is, in my opinion, based off of where every American's been at and based off of all the clients I've seen, it's about an 80-20 distribution.
I think it's more. You're going to say 80 diet, 20 movement.
Literally.
I think it may be higher.
Okay, cool.
I think it may be higher.
Because the thing you realize is,
Because I can work out like a savage
And
and
eat like shit.
and I can go gain 10 pounds immediately. and I mean, 10 pounds is a bad weight.
right, 100%, right.
10 pounds is a bad weight.
And that's crazy because like it's weird because a lot of times when I'm really hitting it hard, man, my diet goes to shit,
Right.
and
Well,
it's
because
like
people can't. They feel like they can't balance the two. And
I'm opposite. So like if I'm grinding, which I always work out in the gym, but like if I can't go to the gym, my diet goes to shit.
Right.
My diet goes to absolute shit. The worst time to have your diet go to shit
it's when you're not working out.
is when you're not, and that's when like I'm the worst.
Right.
If I'm like shoulder surgery, screw it.
Yeah,
I'm putting on 10. I'll worry about it later.
But that's the thing. Yeah, you don't.
I think my brain's been trained from Arnold's Guide to Bodybuilding, and
Of
it's
course. What's that? Pumping iron? You
yeah,
kidding me?
you know,
Shit,
it's
I used to
like-
watch Pumping Iron every day.
it's like you know, like as soon as I start lifting, it's like, well, I got to get it. I got to start eating this way, and really that diet does nothing but cause inflammation.
Right.
That's why the guys are swole.
Literally.
But literally, it
And
causes-
you also can't compare your diet to who knows what cc's of testosterone there are. So their diet's completely different.
They're probably taking 1,000 of test and 500 of trend a week.
a week.
And that doesn't,
For
who knows how much growth. I mean, those guys, I
Right.
mean, come on, seriously.
Well, that's why I referenced Arnold because
Right.
not that Arnold wasn't doing that, but he wasn't as extreme
Right.
as the guys are now. The guys that now are.
Guys now are insane. You can see the difference in just the physiology, the morphology of the muscle mass. It's
gross.
From back then to now. It's nasty now.
Gross.
Nasty.
It's absolutely disgusting.
If there's one thing that's an obvious addiction, it's when you look at a bodybuilder.
Oh, 100%. Because us as competitive individuals who want to be the best at whatever we're doing, who don't want to be less than in any capacity, we develop a body dysmorphic sort of perception where it's like, well, I don't look like him, so I look like shit.
And here, you see it in teenagers all the time now, and you're like, number one, that's just not real life.
Not real life.
They don't even look like that.
Literally.
They-
Afterwards, they're fat and bloated.
That moment is so fleeting.
Right.
Right. They look like that when they step on stage, and then when they get off all the shit that they're on, then they just look normal again.
Even if they're still on this shit, go look at Jay Cutler's documentary where they followed him behind the scenes off season. He looks watery and bloated. Massive, but watery and bloated. He can't even scratch his back because of how bloated he is.
Yeah.
And that looks nasty to me. Like Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation though. When it
Yeah,
comes
I
to
mean, I
bodybuilding,
could,
so.
especially as females, like
Right.
females.
Oh, then the weight affects their endocrine system, and don't even
put
get me
some
started.
fat on and let's look
Right.
normal.
Oh, I agree 100%. I agree 100%.
You know, put
my
some-
girlfriend, like I said, my girlfriend's second generation Sicilian. I have to remind her, like, it's okay that your hips are out.
Yes,
If anything, I
please.
prefer it to be like that. Right.
I want to ask that jiggles when you stop moving.
No flat backs. We don't want to
Do
flat back.
that. No, I want to be walking behind my wife going like this. Yeah, just following it. Just following it. You know? So, I mean, you know, God, skinny women, absolutely not. No.
And yeah, we just live in a day and age where, kind of tying it back to ultimately diet, nutrition, and the proportionality of the distribution really of how you prioritize fitness or nutrition. Like Drew, for you, it seems as though, and this happens for a lot of people, because you up the physical, it's easy to diminish the nutrition, right? Because it's like, I'm killing it in the gym. I can afford to eat that extra whatever.
Or I earned this.
I earned this. Trust me, that is the words I put in my brain when I was eating 2 packs of grandma's cookies right before I ate another Snickers after training a bunch of people. Because I'm like, look at me, I'm in shape. I can afford it. Not until Crohn's hits you and then you realize you can't.
Yeah.
But the proportion of healthy eating to working out, if you understand that most people are willing to adopt the savage mindset of going to the gym, if you're willing to adopt that savage mindset, it's way easier to adopt a healthier mindset when it comes to the foods you eat. And it has everything to do with ultimate effort and output in regards to either of those endeavors. And most of the time, the reason why people fail on either or both is because they lack the knowledge to be able to implement the right things.
When you're talking about exercise, you know, and working out and things like that, you're talking about gym membership. You're talking
Planet
about,
Fitness is $10.
yeah, you got a point.
I don't have any, there's never a client of mine that says I can't afford a gym membership. And I go, Planet Fitnesses are all over the place.
It's brilliant. You know how long it took me to cancel my $10 membership?
Because it's $10.
I'm like, I'll do it later.
That's why 93% of them don't go to the
What
gym.
if I'm-
Brilliant.
Yeah.
It's brilliant.
What if I'm in that part of town? I mean, I might be able to hit that gym. It's like like Dad had his gym bag packed for 6 months. I think I might go to the gym tonight. He always used to say that. And then hey, Dad, you go to the gym? It's still in the truck, you know?
Right.
I did go play poker at the boat, but the gym bag is still packed. So you still have the gym bag and the membership. The intention's there, but
Their business model's brilliant.
is
No
brilliant.
wear and tear on their equipment.
Right. Literally.
You know, as many members as they can get and
Feed them pizza on Wednesday to incentivize
ice
them to
cream
not come back.
socials. Yeah.
Insanity.
Yeah.
So at
and
the
God
end-
forbid, like someone like you goes in there and tries to really get after it, they will stop you.
Lunk alarm goes off.
They'll stop you. They do not want you breathing heavy. in there.
Cutoffs. There's a whole bunch of rules. But at the end of the day, even then, I have clients that don't have transportation to be able to get to a Planet Fitness. So I let them know, you have no idea what minimal movements you have to do physically to actually get a good workout. And what's funny is, outside of the book I wrote, outside of Healthy Made Easy, outside of the consultations I offer my clients, I have a website that has a plethora of workout programs that if you buy one of those programs, it will literally have every exercise you're supposed to do and a video showing you how to do those exercises, so there's no excuse to not know how to execute them. And on top of that, a lot of the beginner programs are no equipment necessary.
Right.
And that's the bare minimum people really need.
I mean, here, you can go to beachbody.com and get the hardest
200
workout.
IQ. You can go on YouTube and find a million different bodyweight exercises.
Yeah. I mean, they're
really the only reason for the mirror at the gym, it should not be to see how good you look, but just make sure that you're doing the movements correctly.
Here, the only douchebags are the ones that are watching themselves after they lift.
Right. That's a good point.
Those are the douchebags. That's a
good point.
The guys that are looking at themselves in the mirror while they're lifting are just making sure they're doing it correctly.
That's what they should be doing.
100%.
Yeah.
My generation, though, that everybody's now recording themselves lifting. Everybody.
I'm like,
if
I don't have
it's not-
time for that shit.
Same. I'm like, I don't have time to set up my camera between sets. I have to triple set this superset.
I know. I literally, like the way I work out, I will do my set, 5 deep breaths, do it again.
Savage.
More weight has done nothing except for break down my body and cause me
Injuries. Yep.
more injuries and surgeries.
Yeah, and I
it's an ego
honestly,
thing,
like my percentage of body fat the other day, and I hadn't checked it in I don't know how long, I was 19%. I'm 45 years old with 10 surgeries. I was at 19%. And I literally, that's my deal. I am in the gym and I move the entire time.
That's savage.
And I'm done in an hour. I got no time to fuck with you. Don't talk to me. Let me get in and get out.
Right.
So since April, I've lost 60 pounds.
Savage. I was gonna say you look good.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Truly.
It's about time somebody knows. It's about time you said something.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's kind of
I don't have a before and after, right?
trying to
I don't have a
throw.
before and after, right?
Maybe we can get that in the post. But well, I wasn't really concerned about the before and after thing for me because I was concerned about how I felt.
100%.
And the whole idea of changing my diet with intermittent fasting I put that to the forefront and put, fit the working out as secondary. It changed everything for me. I mean, and you mentioned that you fast. I really think that there's a whole lot of benefit.
Oh, yeah.
And I can only speak from 60 pounds of what I've lost. The intermittent fasting changed everything for me.
I lost 210 to 187 as from intermittent fasting.
Insane.
And ate whatever I wanted to.
Right.
That's pretty much
ate
where I was
whatever I
at.
wanted
Now
to.
imagine you ate optimally with that same protocol.
Right. Yeah. My issue, I started doing it during the fall because I would work, I'd get up, I'd work out, I'd go to work, football from 3 to 5:30. Then I'd have Frankie's football from 6 to 8. Michelle was coaching volleyball, and I didn't have time for that shit. So I just ate whenever I had time to eat, and I ate whatever I wanted to. And literally, I'd get home from football practice, and it might be a pizza, it might be a steak, it might be a cheeseburger, it might be tacos. It was nothing ever prepared and healthy.
Yeah, it's crazy because
And I still lost 20, what did I say? 210 to 187, 23 pounds.
and I think that you hit the nail on the head. So it's optimal. I still, even though I lost weight, there were moments where I have felt terrible and sluggish. So I say that, and I think we both say that we could eat whatever we want if the goal was just to lose weight.
Right. Yeah.
But how you
Not to
feel
like achy bones and all the stuff I
Yeah.
alluded to earlier, which comes back to ultimately decreasing that inflammation because foods are inflammatory. And if we know what foods to avoid, we can then be more mindful of not feeling so shitty from those inflammatory byproducts. And to further answer the game changer sort of anecdote is it boils back down to that omega-6 versus omega-3 ratio distribution. And if Americans are at a 1 to 25 ratio of omega-3 to omega-6s, where we're consuming 25 times more omega-6s than omega-3s, that's a conservative estimate, then we can understand, okay, well, what foods then have these omega-6s in it? And for the most part, almost every processed food is going to have a seed oil in it. And if you can then understand what foods there you have to avoid, and then increasing the foods that are going to have more of those omega-3s, that's how you fundamentally get at the source of not only all of our inflammation, but most of our cardiovascular diseases, most of our autoimmune disorders, because they all come from certain foods having such an implicating inflammatory effect on our body that starts in one place and cascades down to a bunch of different other places.
Yeah.
I mean, wheat in particular.
Yeah.
Think of it like this. The food we eat today is not the food our ancestors ate. And for you guys being... I always say Italian unless you're Sicilian. You guys
We're
are
Sicilian.
See, and I tell Enzo, I'm like, you're not Italian.
It's totally different.
Lei capisce l'italiano?
No, unfortunately. I wish I did.
Io capisco un po' l'italiano. Nah, I'm just kidding.
You never know with you. You probably speak more than one language.
Nah. I joke around. I know a few, like, Conte.
Because her family, probably her mother tongue might be Sicilian.
Her parents both speak it fluently, but they never spoke it to them, so they don't speak it.
Okay.
But I will say this, since we're talking about nationality and race, things like that, you have a look about you that probably lets you mix in with a multitude of cultures.
Oh, yeah. And I've never had to harp on that unless I was in the two cultures that people explicitly thought I was a part of. The black culture, I was too white for, so they always called me like white boy. And white people, because I spoke with a little Ebonics, they always called me, oh, you're really black. And so like that was always the the bifurcation I got. But if I was around like Mexicans, if I was around like Asian people, I never had that stuff questioned. And for me, yeah, I was ethnically ambiguous at that point. Right. I could kind of maneuver all throughout the way.
Chameleon.
Right.
It makes sense. You could be. I could say Jewish.
Right.
I could see you being
A bald faced Arab, even?
Samoan.
Samoan, right.
You know, it's like you've. That's
It could be, yeah, I agree.
So the point is, though, with you guys being Sicilian, and I have to think about this with not only my girlfriend and her family, but with our potential future children, which I plan on dying with her. I still have to, this will come out by the point, but and she already knows, but I'm going to propose to her this year.
Oh, good.
So that's going to be, and I have to, in my mind, make it more legit sooner rather than later because of not only how I feel about the traditional aspect of it, but for the sake of her family.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you guys being Sicilian, there is a heavy burden of carbs, let alone wheat, let alone gluten being in the diet, right? The carbs, the wheat, and the gluten that you guys are currently consuming is not the carbs, wheat, or gluten that even Enza's grandparents experienced just 50 years ago when they were in a small town in Sicily. Because the way they're going to ferment their bread is different. The way they even make their sugu's different because they're going to sit there with 20 different tomatoes, de-skin them, de-seed them, which are the skin is where it has a lot of the toxic lectins in it. The seeds have a lot of the toxic lectins in it. So they're able to take out the toxic stuff, make their sugu, whereas a lot of Americans nowadays are just making it with whole tomatoes. Or they're getting the can, which has the whole tomato.
which is probably why it's acidic. And
Exactly.
people are pouring baking soda in it, so it
Exactly. And that further disrupts the natural byproduct you would have gotten otherwise if you would have behaved in a way that our ancestors did in knowing how to identify these toxic loads. So,
Which don't get mad, Mom, if you're listening to this.
yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Because I don't remember Mom ever making sugu without just the cans.
No.
Well, and that's the thing is,
And if she did, I didn't.
it's out of convenience.
it's convenience. That's all it is.
Shame on you, Mom.
I wasn't know better, yeah.
Should have put in more effort.
But
Because she listens to all.
Oh
this.
yeah, yeah.
so you end up realizing even the wheat that we consume today, think about how much herbicides, pesticides they put on it.
Oh yeah.
So think of it like this.
Fungicide.
The number one thing I wish people could understand about wheat in particular is I grew up knowing that Roundup was just a thing we all had in our house. Roundup is a weed killer that we would spray on our sidewalks to get rid of the weeds, right? And so I'm sitting there thinking about when I learned this, oh my goodness, the same active compound that's in Roundup, which is known as glyphosate, is what they're putting in all these pesticides and herbicides when they're dousing our crops with all these different fortification chemicals. So what does that entail? The wheat we eat today is not the wheat we ate yesterday, which means the wheat we eat today is doused with this glyphosate. What does that mean and what does that even implicate? Let's think about the cascading effects from square one down to square zero. You end up thinking glyphosate does what to the plant? Just to teach you guys a little something. Glyphosate is going to disrupt the ability for a specific enzyme in wheat known as EPSPS, I think is how it, EPSPS or ESPSPS, I can't remember. I'm dyslexic, so I may flip a couple of those letters. And what happens is when you inhibit that enzyme, you end up decreasing that wheat plant's potential to create proteins in the wheat that make it more nutritionally dense. And what you're disrupting in that plant is known as the shikimate pathway. And the shikimate pathway in that wheat is being disrupted and inhibited to essentially diminish its nutritional value. So how does that affect humans? Humans don't have a shikimate pathway, but our gut microbiome does. Humans can't necessarily break down a lot of things, but our gut microbiome can. So what ends up happening? If we, and we don't really know this yet, but I guarantee you in the next 20 years we'll be able to prove this. This is what is assumed through the hypotheses of science currently, is we then consume excessive amounts of that glyphosate. It then gets into our body in a high enough dosage that disrupts what's known as the chorusmate biosynthesis pathway in the human gut microbiome. And the chorusmate biosynthesis pathway is the pathway responsible for creating certain proteins, namely tryptophan, which creates certain amino acids, which then creates our neurotransmitters. So you have all these people on SSRIs, which stands for what?
Selective
serotonin reuptake inhibitor.
Yeah.
And so why are they on that SSRI? Because their gut's not producing any serotonin. Yeah. Now, this isn't just with the glyphosate. This
so now
is
what they're trying to prevent is the serotonin from being reuptake into the presynaptic cleft.
Exactly. So what you end up realizing, though, is 90 to 95% of our serotonin and neurotransmitters are made in the lining of our gut, namely what are known as endochromaffin cells. And if you disrupt the natural process of those endochromaffin cells to then produce those neurotransmitters, we're at a point where we can't produce serotonin or certain neurotransmitters. And then we end up being serotonergically deficient, which requires us to get on SSRIs because of how depressed and neurologically inhibited we are.
Yep. Depressed.
And that didn't exist before these trash foods were in our diet. So not only will certain trash foods decrease the body's ability to produce that serotonin, certain toxic chemicals like glyphosate will disrupt the body's ability to undergo the natural process in which it's able to produce proteins and then amino acids and then neurotransmitters, which is ultimately the cause of why most people are depressed and anxious nowadays.
And then you always wonder why. So you look at this generation. My generation, I believe, was more mentally weak than the previous generation, which was more mentally weak than,
100%.
Look at the old timers, what they went through, the Great Depression.
Oh, don't even get me started.
World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, Korean War. They went through everything. And here, look at the Holocaust Jews. Who had it worse than them? And there's some of the best motivational speakers came out of it. Corrie ten Boom.
Nobel Prize winners, all that stuff.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think she was a Holocaust survivor. I think Corrie.
Elie Wiesel. We had to read a book called Night by Elie Wiesel, who's a Holocaust survivor, when I was in 7th grade. You wouldn't be able to read that nowadays.
Yeah.
I read that when I was 12 or 13.
Yeah, what about the Austro-Hungarian neurologist? What was his name? Viktor Frankl.
Oh, my goodness.
Brilliant. Some of the things that guy said.
So the point is, that wheat that we're consuming, we don't realize the cascading effects from the time they put that glyphosate on to the time we're serotonergically depleted, meaning our serotonin isn't there. We don't understand that it may have something to do with the excess foods we're consuming. And guess what wheat is in? Everything.
Here.
Dextrose, maltodextrin, preservatives, emulsifiers, everything is wheat, essentially.
And here, I'll tell you, some people are onto it because I know 2 guys check themselves in to... they had a severe exacerbation in depression. Checked themselves into inpatient rehab. 2 guys, 2 separate inpatient rehabs. Both, the first thing they did, take sugar out of all their diet.
Wow.
Immediately, the first thing they did.
Wow. That's amazing.
That's the one common denominator I remember from them. Now, that's only 2 cases.
N equals 2, of course. But guess what? I'm an N equals 1 right now. And how you get an N equals 1,000 and N equals mean how many patients, how many people do you have in this study? The way you get an N equals a 5,000 is you start with an N equals 1.
Yeah.
And then that hypothesis gets clinically measured through actual control trials.
Yeah.
And that's how we end up learning a bunch of stuff. And most of the BS we think that we know that have been pushed and propagandized since the 50s, a lot of them aren't randomized control trials. A lot of them are just observational studies. Fill out this flyer, and now we're going to prove things based off of your trash memory trying to remember what you ate last week.
Right.
Research papers and statistics are only as good as the person who's giving it to you.
What does Mark Twain say? Mark Twain said, he said something where there's like 3 things. I can't remember the quote, but essentially he was like, there's 3 things that are always a lie or something. It's something, and statistics was the 3rd thing he said. Yeah. There's like the 3 things you can always manipulate, but.
Well, here, we could go all day, but I do want to do something before we leave. I want you to give the audience a brief synapse of what your consulting looks like. So, a guy comes into your office, you train where?
So I have my own office over off Inglewood. I have an office, and there's also a gym that we retrofitted in the back part. It's like a bunch of different offices in one building, and we've retrofitted one of the rooms to be an actual gym. So I'm primarily in the office consulting clients, but we utilize the gym every now and then as well.
So you aren't really training anyone right now.
I'm training a few clients. I still have a few clients I still train personally.
But
mainly consulting. Yeah.
Consulting. So tell me what's your clientele?
So, well, realistically, my clientele would be, for the most part, anybody that's wanting to optimize their life to any capacity, but it's primarily in health. And I believe that starts with everything in their life. If they want to be a better professional, if they want to be a better anything, it starts with fixing their diet, their nutrition, and their health overall. Because the way I look at it is, the healthier you are, the better version of a self you are, which means you're a better son to your parents, better child to your parents, better friend to your friends, better parent to your children. You're a better businessman. You're a better everything if you're in a healthier state. And so what I do with all of my clients is it's essentially a coach. It's a weekly coaching and consulting gig where I set goals for them based off of where they currently are. And then we maintain expectations every week that they're hitting to ensure that they're on path to become their healthiest.
So your clients are basically seen once a week.
Once a week, yeah.
You see them.
I have a few clients I see twice a week. A lot of my clients the past 2 years have been high school kids. So a lot of their parents are like, he doesn't seem motivated. He's skipping school. And so from a behavioral standpoint, I've, in the past 2 years, taken up more more young men that have essentially needed some form of mentorship and guidance. And through the same protocol I would give to my 60-year-old clients, my 50-year-old clients, I have a 57-year-old, a 53-year-old, a 6-year-old client. I have a few clients that are well older than me with regards to knowing how life works. But essentially the coaching I give them is no different than the coaching I give these kids who don't know how life works. Because at the end of the day, if we understood how life worked from a base nutrition and health standpoint, we wouldn't be in the position to then have to seek somebody out. And believe it or not, 93% of the population, based off the studies, is technically metabolically unhealthy. So that means 9 out of 10 people would benefit from some form of coaching or some form of nutritional guidance, we'll say, lifestyle guidance.
Yep. So you offer lifestyle guidance, nutritional guidance, and then fitness guidance.
Yeah, I would say health and wellness, the mental and emotional counseling, I look at it as a form of the consulting anyway, as the health and wellness consulting. I look at the mental and emotional side because I do have clients that look at our sessions like counseling, like therapy, but because I operate from the ordained ministerial standpoint, it's one that gives me more freedom when offering them solutions to their problems that a lot of therapists can't because they're bound by certain guidelines from their license.
God forbid they mention the word God.
Right.
Yeah. So you don't have that. You don't have to do that.
So I would also throw
spiritual. 100%.
For sure. 100%.
Spiritual counseling. Yeah.
And these all, most of the time, are an amalgam, meaning they're a collective sum of one.
Which is why you should watch Gary Gray, because he doesn't.
I will, for sure.
Gary Gray will say mind, body, spirit.
Nice.
He'll say it over and over and over and over and over again. And he will focus mostly on spirit. Now, this guy's a genius, but I mean, it's spirit,
I'll definitely look into him. Yeah,
spirit. I mean, I'm clearly a disciple of him. Well, that's awesome. That's awesome. So, I'm going to start doing some personal training because
I saw that. Nice.
You know what? Here, listen, after 18 years, I was tired of treating the injured and bringing them into baseline and then having to send them to someone else.
Right.
And now I want to treat on the other side of the spectrum.
More preventative.
And not even so much that. I mean, here, if someone needs therapy, I would send them. I know exactly where to send them.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
I select physical therapy. They're great. Modern physical therapy is great. Complete physical therapy is great. I know exactly people to send them to, but I want to focus on the people who are at a baseline and then elevate them.
That's amazing. Yeah, and that's the thing. I've had clients that came in and said, I have a client, 57 years old, who said, I have been to multiple therapists in 20 to 30 years. And he says, I haven't been able to get the sort of groundbreaking conclusions that I've been able to get out of 5 sessions with you.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with me being some genius guru. It has more to do with me caring more than the average therapist or counselor cares about when actually trying to resolve their symptoms, solving their issues, because no different than the medical doctors, a lot of these therapists, a lot of these counselors are incentivized to just prescribe something.
Yeah. And that's why, like, anytime I'm very leery of psychiatrists. Very,
I am 100% too.
And I'm not saying there's not a place for it.
Psychotherapy is effective. Psychiatrists usually aren't.
Yeah. I mean, and here, even short-term medication use.
I think there's some benefits for sure.
Yeah.
I will go on a limb here and say that there's natural psychedelic medications that are be more effective than
Hold on.
the SSRI.
There's been research about that back in the
Psilocybin, yep.
60s
Psilocybin
on
research.
psilocybin that was incredibly promising that the FDA shut down.
The only and the only problem to that is it's Big Pharma doesn't have their hands in it yet.
Right.
100%.
Right.
That's why with the Crohn's and everything, there is no profit in fixing your lifestyle changes. But there is some profit margins if I can put you on Humira or one of these immunosuppressants.
Yep. Yep.
So.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you guys for having me.
Hey,
Yeah.
I want to have you again. And
Anytime.
I want to go over that book.
The religion book, the first book.
Oh, yeah. I want to go over that.
It's mainly
for sure.
historical narrative, which means we can really dive in on some
And you know what we got to do? We got to get a friend of ours who is an atheist.
Oh,
and
that would be awesome.
And put him on with
I'd be down.
this.
I'd be down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd be 100%
That
down.
would be excellent.
Then we'll have an arm wrestling contest.
Absolutely.
I'm gaining my weight back. I think that'll be fine. I'll be confident in that in like a month or so.
All right. Good stuff, man. Thanks
yeah.
so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
All right.
Welcome to What Do You Say? The podcast that peels back the layers of remarkable individuals to reveal their extraordinary sides and their incredible lives. I'm your host, Frank Termini, and I'm absolutely thrilled to embark on this journey with you.